Remember our last story? We talked about Göbekli Tepe, that incredible place where hunter-gatherers who didn't even know farming yet built enormous stone circles carved with animals. And then, after 1,000 years, they buried it, just covered it with earth, hid it from the world. There's always a question. Where did those people go? What happened to them? For a long time, archaeologists could only guess. Then, in 1958, in central Turkey, on a flat plain near the city of Konya, they noticed a strange mound. Locals called it Çatalhöyük, forked mound. And when they started digging, they found something that took their breath away. Under that mound lay a city. Not a city as we imagine it. No palaces, no temples, no squares. But it was a settlement where thousands of people lived, 8,000 people. Can you imagine? For the Neolithic era, 9,000 years ago, this was a true metropolis. And here's the amazing part. When archaeologists looked closely at the finds, they saw familiar symbols. The same bulls, the same predators, the same images as in Göbekli Tepe. It was as if the ancient temple builders had simply gathered their sacred objects and moved north to found a new world. Tonight I'll tell you the story of this remarkable place, the story of the first true town on earth, the story of people who lived in houses with no doors, buried their dead under their beds, and dreamed under the stars while standing on flat rooftops. Welcome to Çatalhöyük. Çatalhöyük sits on the Konya Plain, a vast dried-up lakebed from the Ice Age. By the time the first settlers arrived, the water was gone, leaving fertile soil behind. The Çarşamba River flowed nearby, and on the horizon, about 140 kilometers away, rose two volcanoes, Hasanda and Karadağ. Imagine this landscape, a flat, table-like plain, and in its center, a mound. Not a natural one, but man-made, because people built here for almost 1,500 years. Layer upon layer, house upon house. One generation died, and on the ruins of their homes, new walls rose. The mound grew higher and higher until it reached 20 meters in height. The first to understand the significance of this mound was British archaeologist James Mellart. In November 1958, he was traveling across the plain searching for traces of ancient settlements. He saw the mound, climbed it, and immediately found pottery shards and pieces of obsidian on the surface, black volcanic glass that was as valuable as gold in ancient times. Mellart returned 3 years later, in 1961, and began excavations. What he found exceeded all expectations. Entire neighborhoods of houses emerged from the earth, walls decorated with paintings, figurines, burials. But Mellart worked quickly, very quickly. In 4 seasons, he uncovered more than 200 buildings. This was archaeology at speed, and it left behind almost as many mysteries as discoveries. Then a scandal broke out. James Mellart was a talented man, but as it later turned out, not always an honest one. During the excavations at Çatalhöyük, ceramic pots began appearing on the black market, suspiciously similar to those found at the site. They were later proven to be fakes, but suspicion fell on the archaeologist. Then, in the mid-60s, something happened that ended his career in Turkey. Mellart published an article in a London magazine about some Bronze Age treasures that a young woman from Izmir had allowed him to study. He drew the finds, but the woman was never seen again, and the address he gave turned out to be fictitious. Turkish authorities accused the archaeologist of antiquities smuggling. He was banned from entering the country. Excavations at Çatalhöyük stopped and didn't resume for 28 years until 1993, when another scholar took over, Ian Hodder from Stanford University. Hodder worked differently. slowly, carefully, with microscopes and the most delicate analysis methods. Where Melat had excavated over 200 buildings in 4 years, Hodder excavated only 1 or 2 buildings per year in his first few seasons. But now archaeologists could see what had been hidden before. Plant pollen, food remains, and microscopic traces of paint on walls. Çatalhöyük began to truly reveal its secrets. The most amazing thing about Çatalhöyük is how it was arranged. Imagine, hundreds of houses, packed tightly together like a honeycomb. No passages between them, no alleyways, no squares. Wall against wall, brick against brick. An entire neighborhood without a single gap. So how did people enter their homes? Through the roof. Yes, the houses at Çatalhöyük had no doors. Instead, there was an opening in the flat roof with a wooden ladder leaning against it. You climb down and you're inside. You climb up and you're on the street. This means that all city life happened up on the rooftops. Picture this. The sun rises and thousands of people emerge from their hatches onto the flat roofs. Women light fires in hearths, smoke rises upward. Men go off to hunt or to the fields. Children run from roof to roof, jumping across narrow gaps. In the evening, everyone climbs back down into warm, smoke-scented rooms. Archaeologists have found evidence of this. On some roofs, remains of hearths and ash pits have been preserved. People cooked, ate, talked, all up above. Down below, in the houses, they only slept, stored supplies, and buried their dead. The houses were remarkably similar. About 25 to 30 square meters. One large room with an oven or hearth against the southern wall. Along the walls, clay platforms where people sat and slept, several storage rooms for grain and supplies, and always a burial place under the floor. For us, death is something distant, moved outside the city to a cemetery. For the people of Çatalhöyük, the dead were always near, literally underfoot. When someone died, they weren't taken away. The body was wrapped in a mat and left on a special platform, or perhaps taken to special towers where scavenger birds cleaned the flesh from the bones. Then, when only skeletons remained, they were buried under the house floor, right where people slept, ate, and went about their daily lives. Often skulls were separated from the bodies and moved to other houses. Maybe this was a way to maintain connection with ancestors. Maybe skulls played some role in rituals. In one house, the remains of dozens of people might lie, an entire genealogy underfoot. Imagine this feeling. You wake up in the morning, put your feet on the clay floor, and beneath you lie your great-grandfathers, grandmothers, uncles, aunts. They're right there. They hear your conversations, feel the warmth of the hearth, maybe even see your dreams. Death didn't separate the family. Ancestors simply moved under the floor but remained part of the home. Archaeologists have found amazing things in these burials. Jewelry, tools, sometimes lumps of ochre, red paint sprinkled over the bones. In one male burial, they found a flint dagger with a handle shaped like 2 intertwined snakes. Who was this man? A chief? A shaman? Just a respected elder? We'll never know. When you climbed down through the roof into a house, the first thing you noticed was the smell, smoke from the hearth, dried herbs, wool, food. Then, as your eyes adjusted to the dim light, you began to see the walls. They were covered with paintings. The people of Çatalhöyük decorated their homes. Not all, certainly, but many. White plaster, red and black paints, and on the walls scenes came to life. Deer hunts, dancing figures, vultures with outstretched wings, and again, bulls. The bull was the central image in this town. Its horns protruded from walls, molded from clay or real. Bull skulls were set into the plaster so only the horns showed. Sometimes they were painted red. Sometimes female breasts were modeled next to them. a strange, unsettling combination of life and death, strength and fertility. On one wall, they found an entire panorama. Archaeologists believe it's a depiction of the city, possibly Çatalhöyük itself, and in the background, a double-peaked mountain spewing fire. Hasan Deyim does know. The volcano is still visible on the horizon today. Scientists even verified it. This volcano really did erupt around 6,200 BCE. These people didn't just see it, they remembered it and painted it. Imagine, you sit in your house and before you on the wall is the fiery mountain your grandparents witnessed. History frozen in paint. When Mellart found the first figurines of full-figured women with large bellies and sagging breasts at Çatalhöyük, he immediately decided these are goddesses. The Great Mother, fertility deity, symbol of life. That's what he wrote in his reports. But Hodder and his team disagreed. They looked more closely. First, these women don't resemble young mothers at all. They have wrinkled faces, flabby bodies, deep folds on their bellies. They're old women, grandmothers. Second, there are almost never children with them. And third, these figurines were treated like the dead. They were buried, purposefully interred under platforms like actual deceased people. Sometimes figurines were found in trash pits, but with their heads knocked off. And those heads were later found separately in special burials, as if the figurines underwent the same ritual as people. In 2016, an especially beautiful stone figurine was found. Most were made of clay, but this one was stone. A fat woman sits on a throne, her hands resting on the heads of two felines, nearby a piece of obsidian, all carefully placed under the floor, covered with clean sand and clay. A burial just like for a person. Hodder believes these aren't goddesses, they're depictions of respected elders, ancestresses of the lineage. Maybe when a woman died and couldn't be properly buried, a stone likeness was interred in the house. Or maybe it was a way to preserve the memory of those who had passed. 8,000 people couldn't survive on hunting alone. Yes, they ate aurochs meat, huge wild bulls, ancestors of modern cattle. They hunted deer, wild boar, geese, and ducks. But the foundation of their lives was farming. They grew wheat, einkorn and emmer, those ancient varieties with which agriculture began, planted peas and lentils, gathered pistachios, acorns, plums. In storage bins, archaeologists found remains of club rush tubers, a plant considered a weed today, but back then apparently added to stews. Women wove. Impressions of fabric on clay and found fragments tell us this. They spun sheep's wool. Flax didn't grow in these parts. Clothing was woolen, warm, coarse, and they traded. Çatalhöyük's main wealth was obsidian, black volcanic glass. It came from the vicinity of Hasanda volcano, or maybe was even specially mined. Obsidian cut better than any knife, producing razor-sharp edges. People came from far away for it. Archaeologists find Çatalhöyük obsidian thousands of kilometers from the city. And another discovery, possibly here for the first time in the world, they learned to smelt copper from ore. Slag and scale were found, though later it turned out this was probably accidental. A piece of copper ore simply fell into a fire. But the fact remains, these people already knew this metal, touched it, maybe tried to work with it. You know what's most amazing about Çatalhöyük? In all the years of excavation, they haven't found a single piece of evidence for war. No weapons of mass destruction, no fortifications, no mass graves with signs of violence, not even traces of anyone being murdered. Yes, houses stood wall to wall, forming a continuous outer barrier, But this was more likely protection from wild animals than from enemies. No ditches, no towers, nothing suggesting military threat, and no palaces. No houses larger or richer than others. Everyone lived more or less equally. Of course, some had more children, some more supplies, but the social stratification we see in later civilizations wasn't here. So how were they governed? How could 8,000 people live together without a king, without chiefs, without an army? Maybe decisions were made together, at communal gatherings on the rooftops. Maybe elders played the main role, those same grandmothers whose figurines were buried under the floor. Maybe society was held together by shared beliefs, by those same bulls and vultures staring from the walls. We don't know, but the very fact that this was possible makes you think. Our ancestors knew how to live together differently than we do, not through power and submission, but through something else, through a shared home, shared ancestors, shared dreams. Around 5,600, life at Çatalhöyük ceased. The people left. Why? Another mystery. The climate may have changed. It got drier, the Çarşamba River shifted its course. The soil around the city may have been exhausted. 8,000 people over 1,500 years could simply have farmed the land out. Maybe they were called to new places, richer, more convenient. But there's another version. Look at what happened at Göbekli Tepe. There, people built temples, then buried them and left. Here they built a city, and then they also left, as if they knew you couldn't stay in one place forever. As if departure was part of their worldview. Archaeologists noticed something strange. In Çatalhöyük's latest layers, houses become smaller, wall paintings poorer. But people weren't dying out. They were simply living in groups. One family, then another, then another. The city melted like snow in spring until nothing remained but emptiness. Where did they go? Maybe they scattered across Anatolia, founded new settlements, those that archaeologists find nearby. Maybe they went further west, toward the sea, toward places where Troy would later rise. Maybe some reached Europe and became ancestors of those who built the first Danube towns. We don't know exactly, but we know one thing. Çatalhöyük didn't perish in fire and wasn't destroyed by enemies. It simply ended. People rolled up their mats, took their obsidian knives, climbed down from the roofs one last time, and walked toward the morning sun. Today, Çatalhöyük is a mound in the middle of a plain, a quiet place where wind rustles dry grass and birds circle overhead, perhaps the same birds that circled 9,000 years ago above the roofs of this strange town. Archaeologists still work there every summer. Only 5% of the settlement has been excavated. Can you imagine? Everything we know about bulls on walls, burials under floors, obsidian and figurines is just a tiny piece. The rest still sleeps underground, waiting its turn. In 2012, UNESCO added Çatalhöyük to the World Heritage List. It says, unique testimony to the emergence of settled life and agriculture. Official and dry. But behind these words stand thousands of people who once lived here. People who loved, bore children, buried their elders, feared the volcano's wrath, and believed the bull on the wall would protect them from harm. They left us no names. We don't know what they were called. We don't know what language they spoke. We don't know what they thought, looking at stars from their flat rooftops. But we know they existed, and that a piece of their world lives on in each of us. Because we all came from somewhere, and that road didn't begin yesterday or 1,000 years ago. It began there, on the Konya plain, in the city without streets, where the dead slept beneath the living and bulls gazed from the walls. Çatalhöyük was an amazing experiment. People tried living together, many people in one place without chiefs and kings, without army and writing. And they succeeded for almost 1,500 years. But then they left, and their descendants scattered across the world, founding new settlements. A couple thousand more years would pass, and in Mesopotamia, where the Tigris and Euphrates flow, the first true cities would begin to rise. Uruk, Ur, Babylon. There would be kings, scribes, and laws, and that's a completely different story. If you'd like, next time I'll tell you about the people who invented writing, about the Sumerians, about cuneiform, about the world's first city-states. There are mysteries and discoveries there too. For now, thank you for joining me on this journey. Listen to this story. Relax. Until next time.